She had been cleaning her small apartment all morning, trying to make sense of the clutter that had quietly grown over the years. Papers were stacked on the edge of her desk. Coffee cups had left faint rings on the table, and a half-empty box of old photographs was tucked in the corner. She usually avoided looking through old things because they carried too much weight, memories that could make her smile or break her heart. But today felt different. Something in the air made her reach for her laptop, the one she had hardly used in months, and open it slowly, almost reverently. The screen lit up with familiar icons, and she scrolled past work files, reminders, and notes she had left herself over the years. Finally, she stopped at an old messaging app she hadn't opened in nearly a decade. Her finger hovered over it for a moment. Why now, she wondered. She hadn't thought about this app in years, and yet here she was. Maybe it was the quiet morning, or maybe it was the feeling that something she had been avoiding was ready to find her. She clicked, and the messages slowly loaded. Most were old, meaningless chatter, small talk about daily life, jokes that now seemed strange, and conversations that had ended abruptly for reasons she barely remembered. And then she saw it, a single message from 10 years ago. Its date made her stomach twist and her breath caught just from seeing how long ago it had been sent. She hadn't opened it then, and somehow she hadn't noticed it all this time. The message had no subject, only a line of text waiting to be read. She hesitated. For years she had buried parts of herself in routines and distractions. She had told herself that some things were better left unread, untouched. But curiosity had a quiet pull, and she clicked on it. Instantly, she felt a strange mixture of anticipation and fear. The message wasn't long, but the words seemed heavy, almost living. It was from someone she had known well in another life, another version of herself. Reading the first few sentences, her heart began to race. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight that surprised her. They spoke of moments she had long forgotten, feelings she hadn't dared to name, and things she had buried deep inside. She paused, blinking as the memories came rushing back. She remembered the person who had written it, their voice, their laugh, the way they used to make her feel seen and understood. She remembered the days when everything felt possible, when life had an edge of excitement and fear all at once, and she remembered the moment it all began to fade, the slow drift that had taken them apart, leaving her alone with half-formed dreams and questions that had no answers. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she didn't type. She couldn't. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and let herself sink into the past. She remembered the mornings when they would talk endlessly, sharing secrets and hopes. She remembered the nights when silence was just as meaningful as words, when presence alone was comforting. And she remembered the arguments, the misunderstandings, the things left unsaid that had quietly pulled them away from each other. The message continued, and with every sentence she felt herself pulled further into a world she hadn't visited in years. It was like stepping into a room she had once lived in, only to find that it had changed in her absence. The words were filled with a kind of honesty she hadn't realized she missed so much. They spoke of regrets, of things unsaid, of fears and wishes. And most of all, they spoke of connection. A reminder that even when people drift apart, the bond doesn't entirely disappear. Her eyes grew misty, and she pressed a hand to her chest. The memories were overwhelming, and she hadn't expected them to hit her like this. For a moment, she felt lost between then and now, between who she had been and who she had become. The message seemed to bridge the gap, bringing the past into the present with a clarity that both comforted and hurt her. She remembered what she had felt at that time. There was hope, yes, but also uncertainty. She had believed in endless possibilities, thinking that life would always give her a chance to fix things, to make choices differently, to undo mistakes. But life had moved on, carrying her forward in ways she hadn't anticipated. And yet, here was this message, as if waiting patiently for her to catch up, to finally hear it. She read it again, slowly this time, savoring each word. There was a confession, a vulnerability she had never seen before. It wasn't dramatic or exaggerated, it was quiet, raw, and sincere. It reminded her that people are often braver than we realize, and that their words can linger long after they are spoken. The writer had trusted her with their heart, and she had missed it at the time. Tears began to well up, but she didn't reach for a tissue. She didn't try to stop them. They rolled down her cheeks silently, unbidden and unexpected. She realized that she had been holding in so much over the years, regrets, losses, fears, and the quiet ache of things left unresolved. This single message hidden in a folder she hadn't thought to check had unlocked all of it. The room around her seemed to fade. The clatter of dishes, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sounds of traffic outside, all of it disappeared. For a while there was only her and the words on the screen. She felt like a visitor in her own past, witnessing a story she had almost forgotten. And as she sat there crying quietly, she understood something profound. The past never truly leaves us. It waits in small, unnoticed places, ready to remind us of who we were and how we became who we are. Her mind wandered through the years that had passed since the message was sent. She thought about the choices she had made, the roads she had taken, and the moments she had missed. There were opportunities that had slipped through her fingers, friendships that had faded, and chances for happiness that had gone unclaimed. And yet she also remembered the joys she had found, the lessons learned, and the quiet victories that had brought her to this point. Life had been messy, unpredictable, sometimes cruel, sometimes kind, but always moving forward. The message was more than just words on a screen. It was a mirror reflecting a life she had lived and the person she had become. It reminded her that even though time passes, emotions remain, waiting for recognition. It reminded her that connections are powerful, and that sometimes the simplest gestures, a few words, a note, a message, can carry the weight of years. She leaned closer to the screen, tracing the words with her eyes. She remembered the laughter and the arguments, the late-night conversations and the quiet silences. She remembered feeling deeply, loving fully, and losing in ways that had seemed devastating at the time. And she realized that all of it, the joy, the pain, the hope, the heartbreak, had shaped her into the person she was now. For a long time, she didn't move. She simply sat there, letting the memories wash over her, letting herself feel everything she had tucked away. When she finally looked up, she noticed how the sunlight had shifted across the room. It was still morning, but the world felt different, brighter somehow. She felt lighter, though also profoundly aware of the years that had passed. She closed the laptop slowly, but the message lingered in her mind. It was a reminder that life has a way of catching up with us, of opening doors we had thought were closed, and of speaking truths we may have ignored. It reminded her that emotions are never wasted, that tears are never meaningless, and that the past has a way of teaching us things we cannot learn any other way. For the rest of the day, she moved through her apartment in a quiet haze, thinking about the message, the memories, and the life she had lived. She thought about reaching out, about writing back, about acknowledging what had been left unsaid, but more than anything, she thought about herself, her growth, her resilience, and her capacity to feel so deeply after all these years. That night, as she lay in bed, she found herself replaying the words in her mind. They were not just a message, they were a bridge between then and now, between what was lost and what remained. And though the tears had dried, the feeling they brought with them stayed, a mixture of sorrow, understanding, and a quiet sense of hope. She realized that opening a message from 10 years ago had done something remarkable. It had reminded her of the depth of human emotion, the power of connection, and the enduring presence of memory. And in that quiet moment, she understood that crying was not a sign of weakness, but a sign of being fully alive, aware of the past, present, and all the possibilities still ahead. The next morning, she woke with a strange heaviness in her chest, a mix of curiosity and unease. The message from yesterday had stirred something inside her that she couldn't ignore. She made tea slowly, letting the steam rise and fill the quiet apartment, trying to ground herself before facing the flood of memories she knew were waiting. She wanted to remember, but she also feared what remembering might bring. As she sat by the window, the sunlight spilling onto the floor, she closed her eyes and let herself drift back in time. She remembered the first day she had met the person who had sent the message. It was an ordinary day, yet something about it had felt extraordinary. They had spoken without pretense, laughed without hesitation, and shared stories that seemed too personal for someone they had just met. There had been an immediate connection, the kind that makes you feel as if you have known someone for years even though you have just exchanged words. She remembered the days and nights that followed. They would meet in quiet corners of the city, places where the world seemed to pause, cafes with worn tables, parks with shaded benches, streets that smelled of rain and fresh bread. Every meeting felt like a discovery, like uncovering a part of herself she hadn't known existed. They talked about dreams, fears, and the small moments that make life meaningful. She remembered feeling alive in a way she hadn't before, but she also remembered the uncertainty. Life had a way of pressing in, of reminding her that joy was often fleeting. There were arguments, small misunderstandings that escalated because neither of them wanted to admit fear or vulnerability. There were moments of jealousy, moments of pride that got in the way of saying the right thing. And there were days when silence became a wall between them, a barrier neither knew how to cross. The message from yesterday had brought all of that back. Every word seemed to echo the laughter and the arguments, the whispered confessions and the unspoken hurts. She could feel the tension of that time, the constant push and pull between desire and fear, connection and distance. It was as if she was living it again, but this time from a place of understanding she hadn't had before. She remembered one particular afternoon, sitting on the edge of a fountain in the city square. The sun was warm and the water sparkled like scattered diamonds. They had been talking about the future, about where life might take them, and she had laughed at the idea that anyone could really plan for it. They had shared their dreams then, simple, ordinary dreams that felt monumental because they were shared. She could still see the way their eyes lit up with hope, the way they leaned in when speaking as if every word mattered more than the world around them. But memory was not only kind. She remembered the nights when she had lain awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had made the wrong choices. She remembered the times she had wanted to reach out but held back, unsure if it was right to disturb the fragile peace that had developed after arguments or misunderstandings. She remembered the sharp pain of absence, of realizing that someone who had once been central to her life could be so far away in a single moment. The message she had opened yesterday brought all of those feelings back at once. It was like a door that had been closed for 10 years had suddenly swung open, letting the past flood in. She found herself revisiting old streets in her mind, recalling smells and sounds she hadn't noticed in years, the clatter of dishes in a distant kitchen, the hum of a bus engine, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. They all became part of the memory, grounding it in a vividness she hadn't expected. She thought about the small gestures that had meant so much back then, a hand held in silence, a note left on her desk, a smile that lingered just a moment longer than it should have. Those little things had carried weight, though she hadn't realized it at the time. And now, seeing them through the lens of 10 years, she understood how deeply they had affected her, how they had shaped her ideas about trust, love, and connection. The person who had written the message had been more than just a friend. They had been a mirror, reflecting parts of herself she had not yet recognized. They had challenged her, comforted her, and sometimes hurt her in ways that made her grow. She realized that the message wasn't just a note from the past. It was a reminder of how much she had lived, how much she had felt, and how much she had changed. As the morning stretched into afternoon, she found herself walking through the city streets she had once walked with them. She didn't go far. It was enough to sit on a bench in the park where they had spent hours talking. The wind moved through the trees carrying a scent of earth and flowers, and for a moment, she imagined they were there beside her. She imagined the words they would say, the laughter they would share, and the quiet understanding that had always existed between them. She thought about the mistakes she had made, the moments when she had acted out of fear or pride rather than honesty. She thought about the times she had held back and the times she had reached too far. The memories were bittersweet, painful in some ways, but also beautiful in their complexity. She realized that every tear, every laugh, every argument, and every quiet moment had brought her to this point. She was not the same person she had been 10 years ago, but in many ways she was still connected to that self. The message had stirred more than nostalgia. It had awakened a need for understanding. She wanted to know why things had ended the way they did, why words had been left unsaid, why the connection that had meant so much had faded. She wanted to feel that bond again, even if only in memory, and she wanted to forgive herself for the choices she had made, for the moments when she had hurt or been hurt, without knowing how to fix it. As she sat on the bench, she closed her eyes and let herself feel everything at once. The past was not a place to live, she knew that, but it was a place to visit, to understand, and to honor. She felt the warmth of the sun on her skin, the gentle sway of the trees, and the quiet hum of the city around her. She felt connected to the life she had lived, to the person she had been, and to the person she was becoming. Hours passed, and she stayed there, caught between memory and presence. She thought about the message again, about the courage it had taken for someone to write it and the patience it had taken for her to finally read it. She realized that life has a way of teaching lessons slowly, of waiting until we are ready to receive them, and she felt grateful, not for the pain of the past, but for the depth of experience it had given her. By the time she returned to her apartment, the sun was low in the sky, painting the walls with a warm glow. She felt tired, but in a good way, the kind of tired that comes from living fully, even in memory. She made a cup of tea, sat by the window, and let the quiet settle around her. She thought about writing back, about reaching out, but she also knew that it wasn't yet the right time. For now, it was enough to remember, to feel, and to allow the past to be part of her without controlling her. As night fell, she found herself reflecting on the lessons of the day. Memories are not just stories. They are guides, teachers, and reminders. They tell us who we were, who we are, and what we might yet become, and sometimes a single message hidden away for years can open a door we didn't even know we needed to enter. Before falling asleep, she reached for her journal and wrote down fragments of the day, fragments of memory, and fragments of feeling. She didn't try to make sense of it all. She simply let the words flow, capturing the emotions that had surfaced. Writing, she realized, was another way of honoring the past, of acknowledging its presence in her life, and of preparing herself for whatever might come next. Lying in bed, she felt a quiet sense of peace. The message had reminded her of the fragility and beauty of connection, the power of memory, and the strength it takes to face emotions that have been buried for years. She understood more deeply than ever that it is not forgetting the past that allows us to move forward, but remembering it with honesty and compassion. And as she drifted into sleep, she felt ready to continue the journey, ready to explore the memories that had been awakened, ready to face the emotions they carried, and ready, perhaps, to discover what the message from 10 years ago might truly mean for her life today. The following days were strange and quiet, as if the world around her had slowed down to match the rhythm of her thoughts. The message from 10 years ago stayed in her mind like a soft echo she could not shake. She found herself returning to it again and again, reading the words slowly, letting each one sink into her heart. And with every reading, she felt the weight of lost time pressing down on her, a reminder of opportunities missed, words unsaid, and moments that could never be reclaimed. She remembered the choices she had made back then, the paths she had taken and the ones she had ignored. There had been so many small decisions, seemingly insignificant at the time, that had changed everything. She recalled afternoons when she had stayed home instead of meeting someone important, nights when she had walked away instead of speaking up, moments when fear had outweighed courage. All of it had led to the quiet distance she now felt, the absence of someone who had once meant everything to her. The message carried an honesty that she hadn't been ready for before. It spoke of feelings that had remained hidden, of thoughts she hadn't known existed, and as she read, tears filled her eyes once more, not only for the words themselves, but for the life that had passed without her fully understanding it. It was not just the relationship that had been lost, she realized, but a version of herself, a version who had believed in open hearts, in shared dreams, in the power of connection. She began to think about what she could have done differently. She imagined conversations she could have had, confessions she could have made, apologies she could have offered. The what-ifs crowded her mind like ghosts of a life that might have been. Every memory, every fragment of the past seemed to speak to her. A missed laugh here, a missed hug there, a moment when her pride had kept her from being fully honest. She felt the ache of regret, not for the people themselves, but for the choices that had driven them away. At the same time, she saw the other side of it. She remembered why things had happened the way they did, why misunderstandings had grown, why paths had diverged. Life had its own currents, she realized, moving people apart even when hearts remained close. Circumstance, timing, and fear had played their part, and some things had simply been beyond her control. Still, understanding did not erase the longing, the quiet sadness that lingered beneath the surface. One afternoon, she decided to go through some old boxes she had stored in her closet. They were filled with letters, photographs, and small mementos from the time when her life had felt fuller, more vivid, more intertwined with the people she had loved and lost. She opened a box and found a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. It was a note she had written herself years ago but never sent, a reflection of the hopes and fears she had carried at the time. Reading it now, she felt a mixture of nostalgia and sorrow. She had been so earnest then, so determined to be brave. Yet life had taught her lessons in ways she hadn't expected. The message from 10 years ago now seemed like a bridge, connecting her past self to the present. She saw patterns in her choices, recognized the moments when fear had held her back, and understood how those moments had shaped the course of her life. There was sadness in this realization, but there was also a strange comfort. It was as if the past was no longer a separate, untouchable place, but something she could engage with, learn from, and even forgive. At night she would lie awake, the words of the message echoing in her mind. She thought about the person who had sent it, where they might be, what they might be feeling, and whether they had moved on or carried some of the same longing she now felt. The thought of reaching out tempted her, but she hesitated. 10 years is a long time, and people change. She didn't know if the connection could be rekindled or if it was meant to remain a memory. Still, the longing persisted, a quiet pull she could not ignore. She also thought about herself, how she had changed in the years since. Life had taught her patience, resilience, and a deeper understanding of human emotions. She had experienced loss, disappointment, joy, and love in ways that had made her wiser, though perhaps more cautious. The message reminded her that the heart does not forget easily, and that even after years apart, some connections linger, shaping who we are in ways we may not fully realize. One evening, she walked through the city streets she had once walked with them, the familiar corners, the small cafes, the narrow alleys. All of it brought back fragments of conversations, laughter, and quiet moments. She paused at a place where they had once shared ice cream on a summer afternoon, smiling at the memory of playful arguments over flavors. She could almost hear the laughter, feel the warmth of presence, and sense the closeness that had been so natural then. Yet she also felt the distance that had grown over time, the absence that was now part of her life. Sitting on a bench nearby, she let herself cry again, quietly, letting the emotions she had carried for so long surface. She cried for the lost opportunities, the unspoken words, the moments that had slipped through her fingers. But she also cried for the beauty of those moments, for the joy that had existed, for the love and friendship that had once filled her life. Her tears were a mixture of sorrow and gratitude, a recognition of both what had been lost and what had been lived. In the days that followed, she began to write again. She wrote letters to herself, letters she would never send, capturing the emotions that had been stirred by the message. She wrote about the past, about the present, and about the person she had become. Writing helped her process the feelings she had carried quietly for so long, turning them into something tangible, something she could engage with rather than simply feel. The message also led her to reflect on her other relationships, the people she had lost touch with, and the connections that had faded over time. She thought about the friendships that had once been central to her life, the bonds that had weakened or broken, and the moments when she had let distance grow instead of trying to maintain closeness. She realized that the message was not just about one person. It was a reminder of the importance of connection in all its forms, the need to nurture relationships while we still can. Sometimes she would imagine conversations that could have happened, words that could have been spoken, apologies or confessions that might have changed the course of events. She did not dwell in regret for long, but she allowed herself to acknowledge it, to feel it fully, and then to release it slowly. She understood that the past could not be changed, but the emotions it stirred could guide her in the present. As the days passed, she felt a growing sense of clarity. The message had awakened something within her, a desire to engage with her past honestly, to recognize the impact of her choices, and to honor the emotions that had shaped her. She began to see that lost opportunities were not only about what had been missed, but also about the lessons learned, the resilience built, and the understanding gained. Even the moments of pain had value, she realized, because they had taught her about herself and the world around her. One rainy afternoon, she sat by the window, watching the drops slide down the glass. She thought about how fragile and unpredictable life is, how easily connections can fade, and how important it is to cherish what we have while we have it. The message had reminded her that time is precious, that emotions are powerful, and that even after years the heart remembers. She felt a renewed commitment to living fully, to engaging deeply with the people around her, and to expressing feelings honestly, rather than letting fear hold her back. She also began to understand the person who had sent the message in a deeper way. She realized that they had their own fears, their own limitations and their own journey. The message had been an act of courage, a reaching out across time, and she felt gratitude for that. It was a reminder that people are often braver than we give them credit for, and that the simplest words can carry a lifetime of meaning. In quiet moments, she allowed herself to feel the longing fully, to acknowledge the ache of what had been lost, and to recognize the beauty of what had been shared. She saw that crying was not weakness, that longing was not failure, and that remembering was not living in the past. It was honoring the fullness of life. She felt a sense of connection not only to the person who had sent the message, but to her own past self, the one who had loved deeply, laughed freely, and believed in possibilities. By the end of the week, she felt a subtle shift within herself. The tears had lessened, replaced by reflection and understanding. The message was no longer just a trigger for sorrow. It had become a teacher, guiding her to see her own life more clearly. She felt a sense of release, a recognition that the past, though unchangeable, had value in shaping who she was and who she might yet become. The process was not easy, and some days were harder than others. Memories would surface unexpectedly, a scent, a sound, a fleeting glance, and the emotions would return with surprising intensity. But she welcomed them now, understanding that feeling deeply is part of being alive, that loss and joy are intertwined, and that even after years, connections can teach us something profound about ourselves. She realized that the message had done more than awaken memories. It had sparked a journey of self-reflection, forgiveness, and understanding. She began to feel a quiet hope, a sense that even if some connections could not be restored, the lessons they carried could guide her toward a richer, more conscious way of living. And in the quiet moments before sleep, she allowed herself to feel gratitude for the message, for the memories, for the growth, and for the resilience that had carried her through a decade of life's unpredictable currents. She knew the journey was not over. The past was still with her, and the future was yet to be written. But for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face both with an open heart, knowing that even lost opportunities had shaped her into someone capable of understanding, feeling, and living fully. The days after revisiting her past with the message in mind became quieter in an unexpected way. She felt as if a gentle calm had settled over her, a soft space in which she could examine her life without judgment. The first rush of emotion, the tears, the longing, the ache of lost moments had begun to ebb, leaving behind something more enduring, understanding. She realized that the message, though brief and long forgotten, had unlocked a doorway to self-reflection she hadn't known she needed. Sitting at her desk one morning, she found herself staring at a blank sheet of paper. She had started journaling again over the past week, capturing fragments of memory and emotion, but now she wanted to go deeper. She wanted to explore not only what had been lost, but why it had mattered and what it could teach her about herself. She took a deep breath and began to write, her hand moving slowly as she allowed thoughts and feelings to spill onto the page. She wrote about the past in vivid detail, not just the joyful moments, but the painful ones as well. She recalled conversations that had felt ordinary at the time, but now seemed like milestones. She remembered arguments that had seemed intense but now appeared as small sparks that revealed insecurities and fear. She remembered laughter shared under streetlights, walks through quiet parks, and silences that spoke louder than words. With each recollection, she felt both sadness and appreciation, recognizing that every experience had shaped her in ways she hadn't fully understood. As she wrote, she began to see patterns in her own behavior. She noticed how fear had often held her back, how pride had sometimes prevented her from reaching out, and how impatience had caused misunderstandings. She saw that the past was not only about others, it was about her own choices, her own growth, and her own ability to navigate life's uncertainties. And rather than feeling guilt or regret, she began to feel clarity. She could see her younger self not as someone foolish or broken, but as someone learning, experimenting, and discovering the world in real time. The message itself, once a source of immediate emotion, now felt like a gentle guide. Its words reminded her of human vulnerability, of the courage it takes to reach across time and express feelings, and of the beauty that exists in honesty, even when it is imperfect or delayed. She realized that understanding the past requires both empathy for others and compassion for oneself. She could see the person who had written the message not as a figure of her memories, but as someone who had lived, struggled, and hoped, just as she had. One evening, she decided to revisit the places that had been part of that time. She walked slowly through streets that had once been familiar, noticing details she had missed before, the way sunlight fell through branches, the smell of fresh bread from a corner bakery, the laughter of children playing in a park she had frequented. Each sight, sound, and smell brought memories to the surface, not in a painful way, but as a gentle reminder of the richness of life she had experienced. Sitting on a park bench, she reflected on the idea of forgiveness. She realized that the past did not need to be erased for her to feel at peace with it. She could forgive herself for mistakes, forgive others for moments of hurt, and release the tight grip of resentment she had unknowingly carried. Forgiveness, she understood, was not about condoning actions or forgetting pain. It was about freeing herself, allowing the past to exist without it controlling her present or future. She thought about the message again, imagining the courage it had taken for someone to write it. They had reached across time, expressing feelings that could not be delivered when they were first written. She felt a deep appreciation for that act, recognizing the trust and hope it represented. It was a reminder that connections, even when interrupted or faded, can leave lasting impressions, and that the human heart often holds on to meaning long after events have passed. Her reflections extended beyond this single relationship. She considered other connections in her life, friendships, family, colleagues, and realized how easily moments of closeness can drift apart if not tended to. She saw the importance of expressing care, of speaking truth, and of valuing time with people while it is available. The past had been a teacher, showing her that presence matters, that words matter, and that vulnerability, though difficult, creates depth in relationships. As the week progressed, she began to notice subtle changes in herself. She felt more patient, more observant, and more willing to embrace her emotions without immediately judging them. She realized that crying, remembering, and reflecting were not signs of weakness. They were expressions of living fully, of acknowledging both the beauty and the difficulty of life. She felt a growing confidence in her ability to face emotions, both past and present, without being overwhelmed by them. One night she dreamed of the past, not as a painful echo, but as a living memory. She saw herself and the person who had sent the message walking through familiar streets, talking and laughing as they once had. She felt the warmth of connection, the excitement of shared moments, and the quiet understanding that had always existed between them. And when she woke, she carried that warmth with her, a gentle reassurance that the past, though distant, could still offer comfort and insight. She began to apply these reflections to her daily life. She reached out to old friends she had lost touch with, not with expectation, but with the simple desire to reconnect. She sent messages, made phone calls, and accepted invitations she might once have declined. Each small step was a way of honoring the lessons she had learned from the message, from the past, and from herself. She discovered that reconnecting did not erase the years that had passed, but it enriched the present, creating moments of joy and understanding she had thought were gone. In quiet moments, she reflected on the balance between holding on to the past and living in the present. She realized that memory is not a prison, but a guide. The past informs the present, teaches empathy, and deepens understanding. She felt a renewed sense of responsibility to herself, to honor her experiences, to nurture her connections, and to live with awareness and intention. The message had been a key, unlocking not only old memories but a pathway to self-realization and conscious living. She also noticed how her perception of time had changed. 10 years, once a vast stretch, now felt like a thread connecting her past to her present. She understood that life is not a series of isolated moments, but a continuous flow in which each experience builds on the last. The message reminded her that even long-forgotten words can have significance, that emotions linger, and that growth often emerges from reflection and acceptance. There were still moments when sadness returned, brief flashes of longing or regret, but she no longer feared them. She welcomed these moments as part of the journey, understanding that they were reminders of love, care, and the depth of her humanity. She allowed herself to feel fully, without trying to suppress or control the emotions. And in doing so, she felt more alive, more present, and more connected to herself than she had in years. One afternoon, she sat by the window with a cup of tea, Reflecting on everything the message had brought to her attention, she realized that the journey was not about finding closure in the traditional sense, but about understanding, accepting, and integrating the past into her present. She saw that emotions, both joyful and painful, were not obstacles but teachers, guiding her toward wisdom and empathy. She thought about the person who had written the message, wondering if they had experienced similar reflections. If they had also come to understand the past in their own way. She didn't know, and perhaps she would never know, but she felt gratitude for the gift of their words, for the courage it had taken to send them, and for the impact they had on her life. The message had reminded her that human connections, even imperfect or interrupted, have enduring significance. Her reflections extended to the small choices she made every day. She began to notice how her actions, words, and presence affected others. She made an effort to speak kindly, to listen attentively, and to acknowledge feelings that might otherwise be overlooked. She realized that life's richness comes not only from extraordinary events but from simple acts of care, understanding, and presence. By the end of the week, she felt a deep sense of inner peace. The message, once a source of tears and longing, had become a guide for self-awareness and personal growth. She understood that the past could not be rewritten, but it could be honored, learned from, and integrated into a life lived consciously. She felt stronger, wiser, and more capable of facing both the challenges and joys of life with an open heart. As night fell, she reflected on the journey she had taken over the past weeks. She had moved from surprise to sadness, from longing to reflection, and from reflection to understanding. The message had been the catalyst, but the journey was hers alone, a process of engaging with memory, embracing emotion, and cultivating self-awareness. She felt grateful for the opportunity to reconnect with her own history, to honor the connections that had shaped her, and to recognize the resilience and growth that had carried her through 10 years of life. Before falling asleep, she whispered a quiet acknowledgement to herself that the past mattered, that her emotions were valid, and that she was ready to move forward with a heart open to life, love, and understanding. And in that moment, she felt the message settle into its proper place, not as a burden, not as a source of longing, but as a meaningful chapter in the story of who she was and who she was becoming. The morning light spilled gently into her room, soft and warm, as if encouraging her to begin again. She woke with a sense of quiet purpose she hadn't felt in years, a feeling that the past, though present in her thoughts, was no longer a weight she had to carry alone. The message she had discovered had changed something inside her, not overnight. Not completely, but gradually, like a small light spreading through a dark room. She made her coffee slowly, savoring the aroma and warmth, and sat by the window watching the city wake. It was a familiar scene, yet it felt different this time. There was no sense of rush, no tension pressing against her chest. Instead, there was clarity, a recognition that life moves forward in its own rhythm, and that she could move with it rather than against it. The past had taught her lessons she would carry forever, but it did not define her. She thought about the message again. For 10 years it had been waiting, and for 10 years she had been unaware of its presence. Now that she had read it, felt it, and reflected on it, she understood that it had been a bridge not just to the person who wrote it, but to herself. She had traveled through grief, longing, and memory, and arrived at a place of understanding. And understanding, she realized, was a kind of freedom. After a few moments, she decided to respond. Not impulsively, not with expectation, but carefully, thoughtfully. She opened her laptop and stared at the blank message screen, fingers hovering above the keyboard. What could she possibly write after 10 years? What words could capture the years of reflection, the depth of feeling, and the transformation she had experienced? She began slowly, typing one sentence at a time. She didn't try to summarize everything. That would have been impossible. Instead, she wrote honestly from the heart, about what the message had meant to her, about the memories it had brought back, and about the gratitude she felt for the courage it had taken to send it. She wrote about the lessons she had learned, about the ways she had grown, and about the hope she carried for life going forward. Writing became a kind of meditation. She didn't worry about perfection or grammar. She wrote as she felt, letting the words flow naturally. She spoke of the past without bitterness, of missed opportunities without regret, and of emotions without fear. It was not a message meant to reopen old wounds, but a message meant to acknowledge what had been, and to honor the journey that had followed. Once she finished, she read it through carefully. It felt honest, complete, and gentle. She paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, and then hit send. There was no rush for a reply, no expectation of closure or reconciliation. Sending the message was its own act of courage, an acknowledgement of the past and a step toward living fully in the present. Afterward, she leaned back in her chair and felt a weight lift from her chest. The act of reaching out, of expressing what had been left unspoken, gave her a sense of peace she hadn't thought possible. She realized that closure is not something given by others. It is something we create ourselves by acknowledging our feelings, facing our fears, and embracing life with honesty and compassion. Over the next few days, she returned to her routine with a renewed sense of presence. She walked through the city with more awareness, noticing the little details she had once overlooked. The way sunlight danced on the pavement, the laughter of strangers in a cafe, the rustle of leaves in the wind. Each moment felt alive, rich with possibility, and she allowed herself to experience it fully. She also reconnected with people she had lost touch with over the years. Friends she had drifted away from, colleagues she had not spoken to, and even distant family members who had become strangers. All of them received small gestures of care from her. She didn't expect anything in return. She simply wanted to nurture connections while she could, to honor the relationships that had mattered in her life, and to strengthen the bonds that still remained. One afternoon, she decided to take a walk to the park where she had spent so much time with the person who had sent the message. The memory of shared laughter and quiet conversations filled her as she wandered along the paths. She sat on the same bench they had once shared, closed her eyes, and let herself feel the warmth of connection again. Not longing, not regret, but a deep, abiding appreciation. She realized that the past does not have to limit the present. It can enrich it, bringing depth, meaning, and understanding. As the weeks passed, she noticed a subtle change in herself. She was more patient, more compassionate, and more willing to engage fully with the people around her. She listened more attentively, spoke more honestly, and embraced her emotions without fear. She recognized that life is fragile and unpredictable, that moments are fleeting, and that the act of living fully requires courage, awareness, and heart. She also noticed changes in how she thought about the future. The message had reminded her that connections matter, that words carry weight, and that emotions are enduring. She began to plan her life with intention, not clinging to the past, not fearing the future, but moving forward with openness and curiosity. She made small changes in her daily habits, focusing on what truly mattered: relationships, creativity, health, and personal growth. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, she sat by her window with a notebook in hand. She wrote down her reflections on the journey the message had sparked. She noted the emotions she had felt: sadness, longing, gratitude, hope, and the lessons she had learned: that the past is not a burden but a teacher, that connections can last even when interrupted, and that understanding oneself is the first step toward embracing life fully. She thought about the person who had sent the message. She didn't know if they would respond or if they even remembered the connection in the same way she did, but she no longer needed that. The act of reading the message, reflecting on the past, and expressing herself had already given her what she needed: clarity, acceptance, and a sense of peace. She understood now that the power of human connection is not always in reunion, but in the lessons it leaves behind. As night fell, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The tears she had cried, the longing she had felt, and the hours spent in reflection had all been necessary. They had brought her to this moment, where she could look at her past without fear, at her present without distraction, and at her future with hope. She felt a sense of completion, not finality because life continues, but a feeling that she had honored her journey and embraced the person she had become. She also began to notice the small joys in life more fully: a cup of tea in the morning, the sound of rain tapping against the window, the warmth of a friend's hug, the colors of the sunset. Each moment became a reminder of the beauty that exists in everyday life. She understood that gratitude is a choice, a practice, and a way to connect more deeply with the world and the people around her. One day she received a reply. The words on the screen were simple, yet they carried a weight of sincerity and understanding. The person who had sent the message thanked her for writing, acknowledged the shared past, and expressed appreciation for her reflections. There was no need to relive old pain or reopen wounds, only a quiet recognition that the connection, though interrupted, had mattered and still mattered, in its own way. Reading the reply, she felt a wave of warmth and relief. It wasn't a dramatic reunion, nor a resolution of all questions, but it was enough. It was acknowledgement, respect, and shared humanity. She realized that sometimes the most meaningful connections are not measured by closeness or frequency, but by depth, honesty, and the impact they leave on our hearts. Over the following days, she reflected on how far she had come. The message, once a source of surprise and tears, had led her on a journey of self-discovery, reflection, and emotional growth. She had learned to honor her feelings, forgive herself and others, and embrace the richness of life with openness and courage. She had discovered that the past, though unchangeable, could guide her toward a more conscious, present, and fulfilling life. She also began to share her story, quietly, with friends who were willing to listen. She spoke of the message, the memories it awakened, and the lessons she had learned. She did not speak to boast or seek sympathy, but to remind others of the power of connection, the importance of honesty, and the value of reflecting on one's journey. Each conversation became a way to honor the message, the past, and her own growth. One evening, as she walked home from a quiet cafe, she paused to watch the city lights reflected in the river. The scene reminded her of the many walks she had taken long ago, the conversations held under streetlights, and the quiet moments of understanding that had shaped her. She felt a sense of peace and gratitude, knowing that life had brought her to this place, that the past had been honored, and that she was ready to embrace the future. As she entered her apartment, she noticed the quiet comfort of her surroundings, the warmth of familiar furniture, the soft glow of lamps, the smell of tea and flowers. She felt at home not just in the apartment but in herself. She realized that she had traveled far emotionally, from surprise to grief, from longing to reflection, and from reflection to understanding. The journey was not complete, because life never ends, but she had reached a place of balance and clarity she had longed for. Before going to bed, she opened her journal and wrote one final reflection. She acknowledged the past, the message, the lessons, and the growth she had experienced. She wrote about hope, gratitude, and the beauty of human connection. And as she closed the notebook, she felt a quiet joy, knowing that she had honored her journey, embraced her emotions, and opened her heart to life fully. That night, she fell asleep with a sense of completion and peace. The message from 10 years ago, once hidden and mysterious, had done more than stir memories. It had guided her toward self-understanding, acceptance, and hope. She felt ready for whatever came next, carrying the lessons of the past with her, embracing the present with awareness, and looking toward the future with courage.